So welcome everyone. This is the AFS webinar in collaboration with the OECD about activating global competence to respond to global challenges. We're really happy to have you all with us today. Just a few reminders before we begin. I assume many of you are familiar with Zoom and other online features at this point, but this is a Zoom webinar, so you're all muted. You can use the chat, and I see many of you are using already to say hi and connect. And we also have a separate function for questions and answers. We will have some time designated at the end for Q&A, but feel free to post your questions throughout the webinar as well. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll share the recording with you afterwards. And we're also live streaming on AFS Workplace, the intranet we use, powered by Facebook, where we have AFS staff and volunteers connecting from over 60 countries. So welcome everyone. We'll keep an eye on the questions and answers coming in from Workplace as well. My name is Ana Carolina, or Caro, and I am Head of Educator and School Relations at AFS Intercultural Programs. I'm connecting from Florianópolis in the south of Brazil. Just a quick overview. Many of you might be familiar with AFS already. AFS Intercultural Programs is an international voluntary nonprofit that has been developing global citizens and providing intercultural learning opportunities for over 100 years. Our flagship programs that many of you might be familiar are long-term school-based exchange programs for students between 15 and 18 years old. But we also work to achieve our mission through 3 impact goals. We develop active global citizens to take action in their communities. We help globalize schools and institutions, helping educators to foster global competence among their students. And we also help extend access to intercultural education through scholarship programs and also community outreach activities. So this is just a little about us, and let me introduce you to our speakers today. We're very happy to have with us today different speakers, different stakeholders from different parts of the world. We have Diego Manrique, who is a core team member and coordinator of the Global Citizenship Education Youth Network, born and raised and connecting from Guatemala today. We're also joined by Franco Mosso, who is a co-founder and CEO of Enseña Peru, or Teach for Peru, and connecting from Lima. And connecting from Paris, France, we have with us Tarek Mostafa, who is a policy analyst in the OECD Directorate for Education and Skills, working on the 2018 PISA Global Competence Assessment report to be published next month. So welcome all, and I'll hand in the floor soon. And we just want to get to know who is connecting with us today as well. So you're going to see on your screen right now a poll with this first question. What is your primary area of work? So we have some options there. So please share with us if you're a teacher or a school leader, if you're a student, an academic or researcher, perhaps a policymaker working on governmental education body official, non-formal or international education provider, or other. And if other, please share on the chat with us. If you scroll down, you're also going to see we have a second question there for you as well. We just want to know, what are your primary reasons for attending this webinar today? And you can pick more than one. If it is to learn about global competence and 21st century skills, to learn about PISA's Global Competence Assessment and Framework, to hear best practices and different perspectives related to global competence education, or perhaps other reasons. I see we have a question about if we will play the video. We will. We'll share the video recording with all attendees afterwards. So a few more seconds for you to answer, and we'll be closing the poll. So let's see from over our 100 attendees, what is the most, what we see primary area of work. So many people from the non-formal and international education providers, some teachers, students, academics, and many others that I see are sharing on the chat as well. And then in terms of your primary reasons, so most of you are very interested to learn more about global competence and 21st century skills. Great, and that's what we'll be covering. So let me quickly share with you what's in our agenda today, what are the topics we'll be covering. So first, we're going to just start framing the topic and the issue and why are we talking about the need for global competence now and what's the topic today. Then we're going to hear from Diego a little bit about youth engagement to advance global citizenship education. We're going to hear from Franco from his experience in Peru, supporting teachers during COVID-19 crisis. And then we're going to hear from Tarek about a role for Global PISA's Global Competence Assessment. And finally, we're going to have some time, about 20 minutes for questions and discussion as well, where we want to hear from you. And let's get started. So first, let's begin framing the topic of our conversation today. What does the current crisis suggest about the need for global competence and other needed 21st century skills? So one of the things that the current crisis is showing us is that global competence and 21st century skills are no longer optional. For example, we do need flexibility to cope with rapid changes and to quickly adapt to the new realities that we are all faced with. We do need critical thinking to really digest the high amount of information that we receive and to be able to establish an informed opinion. We need to boost collaboration in order to find solutions, to share new challenges and realities, and really to use a we instead of me approach that really appreciate how one individual's action can have an impact on our collective well-being. So to get us started with this conversation around this topic, I'd like to invite Diego Manrique, who will share with us his perspectives on youth activating global skills, and why is it more important than ever to really foster global citizenship education that enables global competence development. Diego, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carol. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or depending on where you are. So I'm very happy to see that there's people from all over the world connecting. So as Carol said, my name is Diego, and I represent the GCD Youth Network, which is a international youth-led structure that works with many different partners, but specifically UNESCO APCU, a UNESCO center in Seoul. And our main goal is to promote GCD through different activities, both on the local and the global level. So today I'm going to present to you a few ideas and a few reflections about GCD, Global Citizenship Education. So first of all, and before jumping into GCD, I prepared a question for you that I would like you to please answer to the poll future. So you're going to have the pop-up on your screen. But the question is, which of the following do you think should be the most relevant set of skills and values on today's education? So please go through the options and select the one that you believe should be the most relevant on the education that we are delivering today. So you're going to have a few seconds to do it, and then we can check the results to jump into a more deeper reflection on GCD. So as you see, you'll have a different set of values and skills. Feel free to select the one that you believe it's most relevant, or if you have any other idea, just drop it in the chat as well. Okay, perfect. So let's check the results. Okay. So most of you believe that the most relevant set of skills are effective communication, teamwork, leadership, and collaboration. So that's great, and I'm really happy to see this result. I wanted to say also that there's not a right or wrong answer on this. There's actually all of this replies or anything that you consider is most relevant is actually very valid. But the reason to divide this into different statements today was to see which set of skills you believe was most relevant. But the whole goal of this is to be able to say that today there's not just one set of skills, but rather a whole more complex set of skills and values that are needed. I see that there's also a few more comments on the chat about the skills and values, but the goal of what I'm going to share to you today is to be able to leave you with one core idea, and it is that we need to move forward to a more comprehensive and more integrative, holistic approach on education than what we are doing so far. So let's jump into GCD. So I'm going to talk to you about some examples and some reflections and thoughts about youth engagement to advance GCD through the specific work of the global citizenship education, as well as a little bit of the conceptual framework of GCD. So I'm going to share to you today 4 key ideas. So first of all, we're going to talk about why GCD is relevant today to build a better tomorrow. Then we're going to talk about what GCD can be considered as a guiding paradigm to deal with the challenges and consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're also going to talk about how GCD paves the way for sustainable development through a holistic approach in education. And we're finally going to talk about the GCD Youth Network as a practical example of youth action for GCD. So first of all, why global citizenship education? Why GCD, and why is it relevant today? So before talking about why is it relevant, I wanted to first address a bit of the concept or definition of what global citizenship education is. And since as many other concepts on the education field and on social sciences in general, global citizenship education is a very contested concept, we're gonna rather talk about the concept or global understanding of what global citizenship is. So according to UNESCO, the global citizenship refers to a sense of belonging to a broader community in common humanity, and it emphasizes political, economic, social, and cultural interdependence and interconnectedness between the local, the national, and the global level. So as we can see, and based on this concept, global citizenship education will be the type of education that would allow educational systems and education in general from the formal, non-formal, and informal sectors or settings to be able to foster and accompany learners into becoming global citizens. So therefore, we're not talking about the traditional definition of education and there is an exchange of knowledge and a set of contents that are delivered that are taught to learners, but rather a more comprehensive approach in education that considers the complexity of the needs of learners in today's world, therefore fostering values and skills such as the ones that we saw before, not just one, but all of them at the same time, in order to prepare them for the challenges of the 21st century and the ongoing challenges such as the COVID-19 situation that we're seeing today. So therefore, the global citizenship education approach, which by the way, it's, I wouldn't say exactly the same, but when we're talking about global competence and global citizenship education in this webinar, we're basically addressing the need for this shift of paradigm into the education and specifically global citizenship education, but also education in general. So we see from this idea of global citizenship proposed by UNESCO that there is the need of this shift of paradigm from originally the local level versus the global. What does global mean? So before we used to think that our local actions have a local effect. Today we are already seeing that our local actions have actually a global effect rather than a local one. So there's this shift of paradigm that's happening and that needs to happen in order for transformation to happen. And I wanted to mention that global citizenship education is actually part of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals proposed by the UN in 2015. And it's SDG 4.7, so it's embedded between, among the education, the SDG 4, which is quality education for sustainable development. So we can also see that the need for this paradigm relates directly to achieving an ideal situation of sustainable development. So I wanted to, in order to establish why is it important, why is it more relevant than ever to talk about GCD and to adopt and work on fostering GCD in the education of our different countries, I wanted to mention at least 3 set of issues or challenges that are not new, are actually the accumulation or the cumulative result of issues for the past few decades. So these are mostly old problems, but I also wanted to mention that GCD is not a new concept. So it does relate, if we see the old problems and the challenges that we are facing today are not a result of something that's happening today, but rather something that comes from the past, such as the need for adopting GCD. So to just address a few of this set of issues or challenges that we're facing today that justify or rather demand the need for GCD, let's first talk about the emergence of new nationalisms and the redefinition of borders and the concept and the idea of nationality. So we've been seeing for the past few years through electoral processes around the world, that there has been this emergence of new nationalisms in many countries. And there has been, according to different studies worldwide, a decrease in the support for democratic governments and democratic institutions. And on the other hand, we have a support for new nationalism movements that become, or in a way can present a problem when seeing it from the GCD perspective, because today we have a process of redefinition of the understanding of borderlines, not just physical borderlines, but real processes of reconfiguration of what we used to understand as a national state. And there's also this shift of paradigm in what nationality is, not talking from the juridical perspective from the law, but rather from a more global understanding of who we are and what place do we belong to. So this is one set of issues that we can talk and to justify a bit why we need global citizenship. Then there's also the one main challenge, which is the global environmental crisis that we're facing today. That I would like to highlight the fact that it's a global environmental crisis. So the fact that it's global means that it requires global and joint efforts to be able to tackle and cope with the effects of it. Therefore, values such as solidarity, mutual work, teamwork, mutual understanding are key to solving this issue. Then we also have migration and mobility, which directly relates to issues such as cultural and ethnic conflicts, as well as violent extremism. So as we know today, there in the current world, except for the coronavirus situation, there has been a very significant increase on mobility and migration for the past few decades. Therefore, our societies are a lot more diverse than they were before. But if we see that if we relate this with issues such as the emergence of nationalisms and redefinition of borders and nationality, this can result in the creation of new conflicts that can be potentially resolved if we address them from the education by delivering GCD. So if we look at these three sets of issues or challenges, we could see that we live today in a very interconnected and interdependent world. As I mentioned before, our local actions have a global impact and vice versa. And also, if we consider the globalized world in which we live, and also a world in which the technological innovations are changing the world very rapidly, there is a need of adaptation and mutual understanding, communication, teamwork, and all those set of skills that we mentioned before that are necessary in order for us to be able to cope with today's challenges. Although they're not caused by new things, they're actually old problems. We need to go ahead and move, adopting all these different ideas that are proposed by global citizenship education in order to achieve sustainable development. And although this is very relevant for each one of us, for everyone in the world, it is particularly relevant for the 42% of the population, which actually constitutes, at least until 2018, the 42% of the world's population was actually under the age of 25, which means that this is particularly relevant for youth. However, it remains very, very relevant for everyone. So I also wanted to talk to you about why this is particularly relevant in the COVID-19 pandemic situation. So because of time, I'm just going to address a few of these effects, but we have seen because of the COVID-19 pandemic that there has been a decrease or let's say endangerment of a few elements that are very relevant to GCD, such as democratic governance, rule of law, the respect of human rights, increase of inequalities, as well as the complications or challenges to deliver education in any type of setting. So GCD can potentially contribute to resolve or to cope with these issues because of its transformative pedagogy. So we're going to check some of the elements that GCD pedagogy proposes. So if you can see, the GCD pedagogy is basically focused on four core elements: holism, so dialogue, critical thinking, and values formation. So we're not going to go through each and all of these elements, but as you can see, if we base today's education on these four pillars, we're able to move forward into a more holistic and integrative approach of education that doesn't only consider, as I said in the beginning, education as this very static process of delivering information and sharing with each other, but rather a more participatory and really inclusive process of learning together among different sectors of the population, and not just in schools, but within the community as a whole. So then let's move on to why GCD can contribute to pave the way for a sustainable future. So GCD is basically built around three different domains of learning: the cognitive domain that focuses on the contents of the education, the behavioral domain that would therefore focus on the actions that we're trying to foster or that we're trying to create from the educational perspective or as a result of education, and the social emotional domain that focuses a bit more on the values and the understandings that we create based on the process of education. So based on this global or more holistic understanding of education, we have therefore this educational paradigm that recognizes the complex needs of learners and that has transformation as its guiding paradigm. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this can therefore contribute to take us or to facilitate for us to arrive at an ideal situation of sustainable development. So I'm just gonna wrap up by giving you some examples of how we work on the GCD Youth Network. What is it that we do? So the GCD Youth Network basically works on three different elements. First of all, training. So we work with youth leaders globally in capacity building activities about GCD and youth advocacy. And more recently, we have also started working on training for teachers, so public school teachers and in private school teachers as well, on GCD, so how to deliver GCD within the schools. We also support different youth organizations and organizations in general. So we accompany local and regional efforts of youth leaders working on GCD and sustainable development. And we also work on communication and raising awareness. So we conduct online and offline campaigns to promote GCD and to raise awareness on the links, and also with the links with key topics of sustainable development, such as human rights or gender issues, for instance. So due to time, I'm gonna stop right here, but I'm leaving you the GCD Youth Network's email on the bottom so that you can contact us if you have any questions or anything that you wanna tell to us. So thank you.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you so much for sharing a bit of the framework, the importance today of global citizenship education and the connections, right? It's not necessarily the same thing, global competence education, global citizenship education, but as we'll see shortly, they have a lot of parallels and we are all working towards the same goals. And as you mentioned very well, the Sustainable Development Goal 4, Target 4.7, that's where it all connects, and really to transformative education. And thank you for sharing the work of the Youth Network as well. I'm sure our attendees are curious to learn more about what you and the network do. And one of the things you mentioned was actually in teacher education and supporting teachers to learn about this. So that really connects on what we're gonna hear next. So Franco, I invite you to share with us the perspective from Teach for Peru, Enseña Peru, and the work you've been doing with teachers and other stakeholders to support teachers, especially during COVID-19 crisis, to foster 21st century skills. Franco.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to share our journey back here in Peru. So our story, I would say, what I'm going to tell you is what collectively we did with other organizations and in partnership with the communities and teachers and principals or districts all over the country. And I think that the two keywords, hopefully that 2 or 3 keywords that we can take from this are: how can we manage change collectively? How can we promote the work based on empathy between different stakeholders, and collective leadership? And so, just to, if we can go to the next slide, just to give a brief flavor of what was the problem that we were trying to address, not only at Enseña Peru, but again, as I said, collectively. if we think of it from the dimensions of the system and teachers in Peru, we have 8.5 million students, just to give a sense of the size of the system, 8.5 million students in schools in our country, and over 500,000 teachers. Of the 8.5 million students, 1.3 approximately are in rural areas. But thinking about teachers and how to support them and work with them and take and spread out their best ideas, I think was important for us to understand the challenges before COVID even. And so I think in our thinking, there was a compounded challenge. No, COVID compounded something that was already complex in the lives of teachers, and taking from what Diego shared with us. Since 2016, we have a clear language in our national curriculum. We had a curriculum reform that was in the making for about 3 years and was launched in 2016. And our curriculum now in Peru includes all of those skills that we might relate with global citizenship. It recognizes broader student outcomes beyond reading, beyond solving mathematical problems, but also STEM, also engaging with other cultures and entrepreneurship and lifelong learning. So it is a broad curriculum, very challenging, but also very inspiring. But since 2016, the process to roll out that curriculum was planned to last 4 years, according to different levels and areas, no? And so between last year and this year, it was the completion of rolling out a new curriculum. And this was a known challenge already, that teachers in our country were in the process of reflecting, what does this mean? Global competencies, 21st century competencies, this new curriculum, what does it mean into what I do every day in classrooms, no? And what kind of the specific practices do I have to keep, adopt, or adapt in order to be at the service of my students? Then there was the latent challenge, which was not visible, but became visible with COVID. It was a challenge that was spoken about in a niche in educational leadership, no? The fact that in-presence education, technology is not a part of the process yet. And then it became revealed and it became a national topic, no? With the urgency of teachers wanting to engage with their own growth in this, in how do I stand in the intersection between education and technology. And then there was the unforeseen challenge, which people did not imagine, and that only came with COVID. That was that roughly 1.3 million students became unconnected from the internet, unconnected from human touch. And there were a number of students in different communities, it varies. It could be 20%, it could be 50% of students that live in a remote area such that they don't have access neither to internet nor to phone. And so there are students with whom teachers have not been able to connect. And that was unforeseen, and that is frustrating. And from that point of empathy, we started thinking, and something that the ministry in our country did very nimbly was to gather data. And in the next slide, we can see part of the data that was gathered and also part of what we were hearing. And there were mixed feelings in teachers. There was, to the left, a lot of sense of strength and of challenge, no? There were 2 out of every 5 teachers feeling that the job was becoming too hard, while 9 out of 10, they were saying that they were able to manage to have a routine at home, even in between a blurry line between the personal and the professional, and being a teacher, but also being a mother or a father at the same time without separation. And 82% of teachers also felt that they could face the responsibilities that were coming ahead. But at the same time, when we were discussing with teachers, we were still hearing questions that were coming before COVID, but that were now more relevant than ever. How do we promote competency? How do we implement this curriculum, this national curriculum, which has different definitions and different understanding of the potential of a student? What is a competency? I don't necessarily have a clear grasp of how to understand that. And how does it differ from teaching knowledge? Wasn't learning knowledge what made you competent? Questions such as, if I summarize content and give it to the student in a WhatsApp, which has been the primary medium for use, is that giving feedback? Or what do I do with these students that I cannot reach? Or from another point of view, they're asking for daily reports, our authorities, and it's really hard because I feel that I should be using the time otherwise. And so I think that for us was a good effort, a national effort to understand, and we as a country, we gathered data not only from teachers but also from school principals and also from families, and we've been gathering data month after month on topics regarding well-being, on topics regarding the experience of the student. This has been very beneficial. But going back to April, in the next slide, I think there's something key to how we approach the work. And we approach the work at Enseña Peru from a perspective of collective leadership, of thinking that coalitions are better and more effective to tackle these different problems, as opposed to just thinking about your intervention and your indicators and not look at what's out there and how we can combine. And so putting students and families at the center, there was a problem of access, there was a problem of quality. And then there were a number of organizations from the private sector, the public sector, and civil society, schools, districts, and there are just a few of them. And this is how we thought about the work. Our mission at Enseña Peru is to build a leadership movement for transcendent education for all students in Peru. And we do that by enabling leadership experiences. We have programs that last, leadership programs that last 2 years, leadership programs that last 1 year. We have short modules. We have collective learning experiences, 1 day, 2 day conferences, etc. All that guides us towards building leadership, a leadership movement. And so there were a number of initiatives that, from this standpoint of collective leadership, we did, and we did it in partnership with teachers that were living this experience. And it was that part of empathy and co-creation and co-innovation was really important for us. And so if we go to the next slide, there are a number of those initiatives that we have tried to be a part of and co-create with different stakeholders. The first one was, what do we do with this challenge of access, right? Students are not going to be able to go to schools. And so the ministry was in conversation with us immediately, right before we knew that we were going to shut down schools and stop in-presence education. And we went to the service of that priority. Some of our alumni, we called them up, and 25 of them became a task force that would join the team of the ministry and attempt to create curriculum to sustain the right of education through radio and TV. But not only that, there were, for example, the TED organization, the TED Talks that have these wonderful experiences is an interesting example of how other organizations brought in their material, and there were students listening to inspiring stories and continuing to reflect through either TV, if they had TV, or radio, if they had radio. There was a very low penetration index of internet in our country, but also there were lots of teachers that were innovating. And so many of these programs had the participation of innovative experiences from teachers from rural areas, from urban areas across the country, inspiring students across the country, inspiring teachers across the country. And not only that, now we are seeing also student-led programs in our curriculum, in our national curriculum for TV and radio. And the curriculum went from for all students in the country, also through a platform, but that has very limited access for students. We participated, we joined part of the alliance, reaching 1.5 million students. And it continues to move on, and it seems to be a good investment of time and challenging paradigms about who can learn and from who. The second thing that we did from the standpoint of collective leadership was thinking about district leaders. And district leaders are so important in any educational ecosystem. In our country, they are the closest link to teachers and school principals. They set the tone of the culture of learning, of innovation. They set the culture of professional development. And so part of our leadership programs, we took a module and we just provided a space to learn about how to foster these 21st century competencies and global citizenship. To actually take that important policy of national curriculum and ask ourselves a question, okay, how do we bring that to life in our day-to-day practice? And we thought it would be a good idea to do it with the 3,000 people that work in the 220 districts in our country. And so up to this date, 800 teachers, 800 leaders from districts have gone through this, and they are going to action. They took the principles of the module and they are creating their own innovations. We created a scalable protocol that was called Education Won't Stop, and we co-created that with teachers to have a set of principles that were practical enough and research-based for teachers to activate their creativity and have a common language. We also co-created a disruptive event in one of the regions that reached 16,000 teachers that was called Between Teachers, and is now becoming a public policy of professional development in a virtual setting with lots and lots of options for teachers to choose, and many were highly satisfied. And it was a new experience of how to have an experience of professional development. And finally, we partnered with different organizations to mobilize a group of more than 1,000 volunteers to gather data from families, the very data that we're using now at a greater scale to take decisions. And so that's just a brief overview of the kinds of initiatives where we've been involved, but all of them from a perspective of collective leadership in indicators of students and how they are living the experience. We're slowly seeing at a national level an increase in satisfaction, students that are receiving greater and greater experiences, being aware of their own growth. And we feel very inspired to be part of this collective leadership. And so that's pretty much our case. For the future, it will be about sustaining this collective leadership, continue to have spaces that give way to the innovation of teachers, to have collective language about how to implement those 21st century and global citizen competencies. And that's where we're at.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Franco. Thank you for sharing this perspective on collective leadership, the experience in Peru, and again, the importance of multi-sector collaboration and different stakeholders being engaged to support teachers with education overall, but with transformative education and for global competence education. Now I would like to invite Tarek Mustafa to share with us a bit on assessment of global competence and what has been the role of PISA Global Competence Assessment. Tarek.
Okay. Thank you, Ana Carolina, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be with you today, especially that in a month from now, the OECD, in collaboration with AFS, are going to launch PISA's first report on global competence, so which exploit data from collected in 2018. So this is the first time, actually, in PISA's history that we collect data from students in 66 countries on global competence. So in this presentation, well, I mean, at this stage, I cannot share any of the results with you, but we could explore together the concept of global competence and how it was defined and assessed in the PISA program. So first, I'll start with a definition. So what is global competence? Global competence is defined as a multidimensional capacity that encompasses the ability to examine issues of local, global, and cultural significance, understand and appreciate the perspectives and worldviews of others, engage in open, appropriate, and effective interactions across cultures, and finally, to take action for collective well-being and sustainable development. So PISA essentially was trying to assess to what extent are students globally competent, what are the inequalities that exist in access to education or to learning opportunities that would allow students to become globally competent, and what are the approaches that teachers and schools could adopt in order to promote and foster global competence among their students. And finally, we also are trying to answer some questions about how teachers can be prepared and in order to promote global competence in their lessons. So why are we assessing global competence? Well, I mean, why global competence is needed in the first place? So, I mean, the arguments that we presented in the framework, well, first, well, the basic argument would be to live harmoniously in multicultural societies. We all live in in societies that are very diverse. And so we work with people from other cultures. We go to university with people from other cultures. We have neighbors from other cultures and so on. So it's not, I mean, it's something relevant to every one of us. Secondly, the labor market is changing, and now it's no longer enough to be good in math, science, and, you know, so those that like, you know, the basic skills, but also to have those soft skills, which allow people to interact effectively with others. And there are also other relevant reasons why global competence is important. So now we know, I mean, students should be able to use the media effectively and responsibly, and especially with social media and, you know, the rise of social media and new forms of media. It's important for them to understand information, the accuracy of the information and where it comes from. And finally, one of the goals of the OECD is to provide something that would support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by providing an assessment of one of the key goals, namely Goal 4.7, which emphasizes the role of students as global citizens. So global competence encompasses 4 different elements. First, knowledge. So students should have knowledge about global issues and about intercultural issues. For instance, global issues could include, for instance, global warming, environmental issues, public health, such as pandemics, hunger, malnutrition, poverty around the world, gender equality, and of course, intercultural relations. Then students also should be able to develop cognitive skills like critical thinking and the ability to examine information critically and to in order to reach an informed opinion. And the third aspect is social skills and attitudes. And these all three aspects were assessed in the PISA 2018 Global Competence Assessment. The first two were also assessed in the cognitive test, and the last one, in addition to the first two, were assessed in the student questionnaire. The fourth element is values. So this is the only element that we did not, so that was beyond the scope of PISA 2018 and was not assessed. So now to move on to the different dimensions of global competence. So here actually is the is the figure, I mean, that shows the different, the 4 dimensions of global competence. And the first one is examining local, global, and intercultural issues. Students with the ability or who are globally competent in this dimension are able to combine knowledge about the world, critical reasoning, whenever they form an opinion about a global issue. They use higher order thinking skills, like critical thinking, in selecting and weighing appropriate evidence, and in order finally to form an informed opinion about the topic that they are dealing with. The second dimension is to understand and appreciate the perspectives and worldviews of others. So this dimension would require that students, well, first, they should be able to understand their own perspective. They should know that as individuals, they have their own cultures, a system of values and beliefs, and they have a perspective on the world, and they have a system of beliefs. Other students and other people also have their own perspectives. And this dimension, it implies that students will be able to first understand understand the culture or the background or where others are coming from. And they should also be able to show respect, interest in other people's beliefs, and curiosity. And so the third aspect of global competence is the ability of students to engage in effective communication. So people who are able to examine global and intercultural issues, who are able to understand the perspectives of others, should be able to communicate effectively with them. This dimension emphasizes the ability of students to understand the interactive styles and degree of formality and of intercultural context, and the ability to adapt their behavior and communication style to suit these contexts. And finally, the final dimension of global competence is to take action for collective well-being and sustainable development. So this actually is the culmination of the 3 first dimensions. So students who understand the global issues and intercultural issues, who understand the perspectives of other people and who can communicate with them effectively, should also be able to take action. So the culmination of the process is this outward expression of action by taking action for collective well-being and sustainable development in the different domains that I have discussed before. So it could be the environment, public health, intercultural relations, and so on. So the PISA instruments or the PISA assessment relies on 2 instruments that we have used. First is we have a cognitive test. So basically, students would have to sit a test similar to the ones we have for math, science, and reading. But this one would focus on global issues and on intercultural relations. So the test consists of usually of a scenario where the students are introduced to a particular issue within a context and so on. And then they are asked a number of questions where they have to use their existing knowledge, their understanding of the scenario in order to answer the questions. And the other instruments are basically the questionnaires that students have to answer. So we have a set of questions that students had to answer, covering different, so actually 9 different topics, like awareness of global issues, self-efficacy or confidence when dealing with these global issues, openness towards other people from other cultures, interest in people from other, learning about other cultures, respect for people from other cultures, cognitive adaptability, so that the ability of the student to adapt in contexts which are unfamiliar, attitudes towards immigrants, which actually is quite important in most countries around the world that have large immigrant populations. And we also have awareness about international, intercultural communication, and finally, a scale for agency regarding global issues, or let's say the willingness of students to take action and how responsible they feel in dealing with these and solving these global issues. So in addition to this, I mean, the test also focuses on proficiency on these different dimensions, and we could contrast data from both the questionnaire and from the test. In addition to the student questionnaire, we also had, so all participating countries had a school questionnaire that was answered or filled out by the school principal, and it describes the kind of activities students engage in at school, and whether the school, for instance, has a curriculum that covers those global issues, whether intercultural issues are covered in the curriculum, and how teachers include those topics in their lessons. Also, teachers were asked about, so we have a teacher questionnaire, and they were asked about how they include those topics in their lessons, and what kind of professional development activities they engaged in their teacher development programs and in the last 12 months. So basically, we kind of have a very comprehensive set of instruments, both addressed at students, teachers, and schools, that will allow us to inform, hopefully, policy and provide some evidence from around the world. Finally, I would just say that we have 66 countries that participated in the assessment. They did all the student and school questionnaire, and then we have among them 27 countries that did the global competence test. So thank you very much, and I'm happy, we'll have times for questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tarek. Thank you so much for sharing this. And before we move to Q&A, and I see Frank already answered the question, and we have others coming up from the live stream, just want to leave an invitation that everyone attending this webinar, you're also going to receive information about the Global Conference. And as Tarek mentioned, at our AFS Global Conference next month, we'll be sharing in collaboration with OECD the results of the PISA 2018 Global Competence Assessment, so we can learn more about what the data is saying us of the state of global competence in participating countries, among students, and also with the questionnaire with schools and teachers. So let's start with the questions. Diego, I see we have one for you that I shared that came to the live stream. If you can share with us what was asked and your answer, and the one we have on the Q&A as well.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. So I'm gonna start with the one that's actually in the Q&A section. So thank you, Olga, for the question. So you're right. She's wondering what other adult stakeholders should be considered for GCD, or for achieving an ideal scenario where GCD is being delivered. And I would like to say this brought me to a time when I was conducting a workshop for teachers, for public school teachers in Uruguay. And a teacher said that something that really relates to this. She said that teachers are expected to do a lot of the work, or all the work related to GCD. And or at least that was her perception, that there was no support from other stakeholders. And you're right, like I would say not only teachers are responsible for delivering GCD, there's also a whole set of actors that should be considered. But I would say this is something, although GCD is not new, or the concept of GCD is not new, we're just starting to grasp a general understanding of what it is. So slowly but progressively, there is a lot of more actors that are getting involved, not just international organizations and teachers and authorities around education, but there should also be a whole and a lot more large set of actors that should get involved in GCD, such as other governmental authorities, not just the ones that take care of educational topics, but everyone, because this is exactly what we're trying to propose with GCD, that a whole more comprehensive set of actors should deliver the skills and the tools and the knowledge necessary to cope with today's challenges. So we cannot pretend that just the teachers or just the Ministry of Education or just UNESCO or just organizations like this will be the ones that will do it. But it requires a lot more effort, such as what Franco shared. There should be an effort to sustain collective efforts and collective leadership. Then there was a question about what specific complications do you see with the virtualization for education for youth. So I want to mention at least two. First of all, there's complications regarding the access, which I guess we all understand is very well. When I'm talking about access, I'm not talking just about access to the internet, but access to actual physical materials that people need in order to develop skills, in order to learn. I'm a teacher myself. I teach foreign languages and I'm doing it through Zoom. So I know how hard it can be for you to do a specific activity without them having specific materials that you have created or that they need in order for you to make sure that they are actually understanding what's happening and that in order for you to evaluate that what you're teaching is actually being understood by your students. That's one thing, but then also one that's very important is that through this virtualization of education, I think there is this prioritization of the cognitive aspect of education, and we are in a way being forced to leave a bit aside what I mentioned before, the behavioral and the social emotional dimensions of education, because we have very limited time to be with the students. Therefore, we have to focus on them getting the necessary knowledge, and sometimes we have to sacrifice the development of other skills. I'm saying this from my personal experience, but also from this perspective of GCD. And then there was one last question about how can students get engaged on GCD. So if I understood the question correctly, how to get involved in the GCD Youth Network, well, you can contact us through our social media or email to collaborate with us if you want to, if you have a project to propose or something that you want us to support you on. But if the question is how they can get engaged on GCD in general, I think, well, there's many ways to do this. And I would like to say that this name of GCD, actually, it's more of a generic name, but there is a lot of people, and I'm sure there's a lot of students that are already working on GCD, if they are working on initiatives on climate change, if they're working on bridging inequalities, if they're working on some local issues, they're already working on GCD. Although they're not calling it GCD, they are already doing it. So how they can get engaged, I'd say identify an issue or help, if it's the case for your students, help them identify an issue that they're passionate for, that they want to have an action upon. And then by addressing that problem and solving it collectively, they are already in a way working on and engaging on GCD.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Diego. We are short on time and we have a lot of questions more. I see both Franco and Tarek are answering. Tarek, there are some that I saw you answer. Would you like to comment on those, especially on the age group for the assessment and also around what's included in the competence framework?
Yeah, so PISA, assesses 15-year-olds, so we don't have any other age groups. Although I can see the importance of assessing, because global competence is something we say in the framework that's a lifelong process. So it doesn't start at age 15 and doesn't end there. So it's something important for everyone from a young age until, and then the second question is about the inclusion of items. So all items and the questionnaire were developed by our experts, so external experts working with us. And they were tested, and they were so we had multiple kind of technical tests to assess their suitability and how comparable they are across countries. And then we retained so actually we end up discarding the ones that did not work. The other constraint is that students cannot answers hundreds of questions. So we have kind of a constraint in terms of how much time we can take from the students in order to do the global competence questionnaire and test. So cultural, cultural self-awareness. We do not have an individual test, an individual scale for that, although as a concept, it overlaps with some other scales like perspective taking, which, I mean, students would, the first thing would be to be aware of their own cultural background and their own perspective on things. So yeah, this is perspective number one. And then you have the other perspective of other people.
I see we have some more big picture there, the difference between global competence education and global citizenship education. Diego tackled some of these, and I see a lot of parallel between the framework that you shared, Tarek, and the framework Diego shared from UNESCO. Any comments on that?
I think, I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, great overlap between the two. So sometimes it's just like a difference in how we call things. So, but I mean, mainly, and sometimes actually when we say global competence, it's not just about like the person living on the other side of the planet, you know, sometimes, I mean, people get this impression, but really it's about, it's very local as well. It's about the people who have similarities and difference than us and who live next door or work with us in the workplace and so on. So it's global, it's local, and it's also about citizenship. So.
Wonderful. Franco, any final remarks before we wrap up, or any of the questions you would like to address live?
So the connection with ancestral values, I think, at least for us in our curriculum, it is now part of the experience. No, it's no longer not considered. The number one competency of our curriculum is to have a solid understanding of your culture and your identity. And so it is an important challenge to tackle, again, collectively, because if I am going to sort of create something for a culture that is not my own, that's not the way to go, right? I think that it comes to mind, just as a final remark, a leader of a district in a community was from the community of the Awahum, and she said, we want the best from both worlds. And my community wants the best from both worlds, no? Not any kind of a string. So it's a complex challenge, but I think for us, putting minds together in a serious way, in a sustained way, brings more integral solutions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you all for inspiring. I wish we could stay online much more. Thank you for all attendees that still stayed online. For questions that weren't addressed, please feel free to email them. We will send a follow-up email with the materials. You got some contact information from our speakers as well. And thanks again, Diego, Franco, and Tarek, for joining us today for this stimulating conversation. We'll be sharing a quick feedback survey with all attendees, and thank you so much everyone for joining.